Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are here in 2022, Camera Club of Richmond. My name is Karen Davis, and I'm the Communications Director for the Camera Club. And what we want to do tonight is go over the procedures for our end-of-year photo competition that's coming up in just a few weeks. It's getting close. We're in the month of September, and the images are due in October, and then the judging is done in November, and then all the winners are announced in December. So it's going to be a busy few months for us. But we wanted to go over some of the things. A lot of things have stayed the same from last year, just a few minor changes, but it's always good to kind of refresh. And we're going to launch into that by, first of all, I will share my screen and show you where you can find those procedures. And I'll just mention that Carol and Heidi are with us here. They're our test subjects. Okay, so if you go to the Camera Club of Richmond website, cameraclubofrichmond.com, under the club information tab, you will see end of year competition. And there's a little bit of an overview. Our president, Harold Lana, put a little message out here to talk about our end of year competition. We are still kind of, sort of in COVID this year, but we decided a few months ago that we were going to do our darndest to reinstate our print competition. So the past couple of years, it's been all digital, which made it a little more streamlined for us in terms of arranging things and getting judges, et cetera, et cetera. But this year, we are going to go back to pre-COVID times and have both a digital competition and a print competition. So they are judged separately. You can submit images into, a few digital images, a few print, or all digital or all print. It's any mixture of what you would like to submit in that. We also added a little bit of a twist to it that we probably won't do again next year, but because things were still up in the air early in the year, the board decided that we would stay with digital, see how things panned out, and then allow you to switch your digital images to prints for end of year if you wanted to. So any of those 12 that you've submitted for our evaluations earlier in the year, feel free to, if you looked at that and the evaluator really, really liked it and you want it up on your wall and you want to submit it as a print, then that's fine. And we'll go over what those guidelines are for submitting prints too. So again, you've got lots of options this year. Just a quick reminder about the deadline. I mentioned October. It will be midnight, October 15th. That's a Saturday night. That'll be when all of your digital images need to be sent in to our digital director. And we'll go over that. It's definitely in the procedure with all the details on that. Then our judges will meet on the 12th. We have our fingers crossed that our wonderful PSA rep, Carol Hageman, is inviting some of her PSA buddies, and that's Photographic Society of America. Carol's been a member for years and years. She's inviting them, and hopefully they will come to Richmond to judge in person, as they always did pre-COVID. The last couple of years, we were able to do it all online. Everybody had their computers in their homes, and we had judges from, I think, Connecticut or Delaware or somewhere, but they were able to judge from their home, and we showed them the digital images and they judged. So hopefully, if they will come, we're hoping to have it here in Richmond, and of course they will do the digitals and the prints. And that will be on November the 12th. That's kind of an all-day thing. Then our awards ceremony will be on December the 7th. That is the first Wednesday in December, so please note that on your calendar. I put a recurring event on my Google Calendar for the second Wednesday of every month. That is our Camera Club meeting. But in December, we're hoping, again, we've got all the fingers crossed, that we'll be able to actually have a banquet again this year. Our treasurer, Doug Turner, is working on getting that at the University of Richmond in the Alumni Center, where we have held it in the past. So again, mark that on your calendar. If things happen and we can't have the banquet, we will still have an online awards assembly so that we can announce who the winners are in all the different categories. So moving down a little bit, we're going to talk about those categories and groups and everything. And the best way to probably talk about that is to actually open up the procedures. I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit. A couple of other highlights, and Carol and I were talking about this just before we started our recording. Into the end of year competition, you're allowed 12 photographs, up to 12. You could enter 1, 2, 3, anywhere up to 12. And the concept was that we would hold these evaluations throughout the year. We have 6 evaluations, and in each evaluation, you're invited to submit 2 photos. So that I can do that math in my head. 2 times 6, you get 12. And those are the ones that hopefully you get some feedback from the evaluators, and you can make some tweaks, and you can change the matting, or you can crop it, or you can, change the shadows or the highlights or whatever based on what the evaluator tells you, or, if you just decide you want to do something totally different with that picture. So you can enter those 12 images, or if there are a couple that, Anthony Rumley just said, yeah, he didn't really like that one picture of mine, I can toss that picture out and introduce a totally different picture as one of my 5 wildcards. So again, you have to, if you've gone through the evaluation, you want to do 12, at least 7 of them have to have gone through one of the evaluations to be entered into the end of year competition. But those wildcards can kind of save you. In fact, I've talked to several photographers who have told me, and in fact, I was talking to Jeff Claypool just recently, and he won Best in Show a few years ago, and the image that won Best in Show was a wild card. It hadn't gone through any of the evaluations. It was just a stunning black and white image. So you never know. You get lucky maybe in late September with a great shot, put it in end of year. All right. We do give awards, and I mentioned that earlier. It will be December the 7th. And I am now down to the link for the procedure. So I'm going to click that link. It's a PDF file, and it'll take that a second to pop up here. And a couple of things I want to point out about it. We have a lovely cover page here, but the table of contents is interactive. So if you come in and you say, I just really have a question about categories, and if you see my little pointer there, it's changed to a pointing hand, you can simply click on that topic and it'll take you directly to the category. So you don't have to read the whole thing. And please don't read the whole thing. But it will talk about and go through all the different categories where we channel all the photos that we get for our end of year competition. So each one of these in our table of contents are interactive. We broke it down last year. This was a great idea from Bob Scammerhorn, who he helped put these together and sort of revise them last year, because we had some pretty major changes last year. He said, Karen, they're really in 2 sections. They're the information and the critical stuff. And then there's a lot of references, support, helpful hints, et cetera, that probably not everybody needs. So the important stuff is up under the information and procedures. And then if you really had a question about something, those references, a little bit of an article about how to select a category. We get that question quite often. And we'll touch on that a little bit as we go through it. But I wanted to make sure that we hit the important stuff to make sure we value your time. We don't keep you here any longer than necessary. I've gone through a lot of these updates already, and just from what was highlighted on the website. But we talked about prints, that you can enter digital or prints. We did make a little bit of a tweak to the wording on how you post-process your images. We're seeing a lot of people use tons and tons of new software that's out there, and it's so much easier to use now, and there are different options and upgrades. So what we wanted to do is to allow a little bit more in terms of enhancements to exposure, color, tone, sharpening, contrast, etc., and just broaden that out a little bit. The way it was worded before was like you could only make very, very regimented, small changes to your images. Now, we don't want you to go hog wild in the general categories, and those are the basics, the animals, flora, landscape, portraits, etc. We want to keep those images realistic. And we also want to make sure that it is a single image, not a composite, not, a bunch of images put together. You can do that, and we encourage you to do that because it shows your creativity, but we would like to have you reserve all of those creative changes for our creative art category or for any of the assigned subjects. I think both of you participated throughout the year, and this year we had 3 assigned subjects, as we do every year. This year they were photojournalism, abandoned, and about time, which we had at our last evaluation. And the sky's the limit on the creative art category and any of the assigned subject categories. You can put multiple images together. You can plop a moon in from another picture. You can take a bee from one picture and a flower from another, and do all kinds of creative stuff in that creative art category. But in the general categories, we'd like for you to keep those post-processing things kind of to a minimum, so we retain that realism of that photo. Deadline we talked about, October 15th. We just try to remind folks that we do share the photos. We will put them on our website, on our Facebook page, and they probably will appear in Southern Exposure, our monthly newsletter. So just by entering, you're kind of granting permission for us to share those photos. There are guidelines later on that we'll go over in detail on how to name your photos. This is the thing that seems to trip most people up because it's a little bit more complicated. If you think about it, we have hundreds and hundreds. I believe it was over 400 entries last year into our end of year competition. And the computer system and manually, we're trying to plug them into different groups and different categories and black and white versus color. So we need to highlight that in the title. So we'll go over that a little bit. I'll show you some examples of how we name those photos. So I'm going to talk about groups, and then I'm going to pause and see if you have any questions. We went last year from having a 2-group structure to having a 3-group structure. So now we have a novice intermediate group, our group N, we have advanced, and then we have our expert group. The novice group, novice intermediate, is designed for those who have never participated before, or brand new to the club, or they feel like they're just starting to learn their photography skills. We want them to be able to feel at home in that new group. The advanced group probably has the largest bulk of our members participating. And then we have, 8 to 10 folks that have classified themselves as expert. And we did allow folks to pre-select last year. And if you've never participated before, you're allowed to pre-select. Carol and I were talking earlier, if you've gone into a group and you feel like maybe that was not the right choice, feel free to email one of the board of directors and we'll be happy to talk with you. And it is possible to move back down again if you don't feel comfortable. You're all bold and decided to jump into the expert group, and then you saw some of their pictures and said, oh, maybe not. It's possible to move back down to advanced, or if you were in advanced and you think, I think I probably belong in novice, just talk to us, send us an email, and we'd be glad to talk to you about that. We did come up with some guidelines on how to advance forward. I'm not going to go into all of those details because it's sort of a multi-year process to allow you to get settled within a group, to feel comfortable, to learn more, to advance your skills. And then when you're comfortable, we've got a methodology to moving forward from the groups. So let me just stop talking for a minute. I've been doing a lot of talking, and see if there are any questions from any of the folks on the call. In fact, I will stop sharing here for a second.
I'm just trying to make myself understand that all the evaluated pictures that were not assigned subjects are the ones that we're placing in those different categories of
Correct.
subject. So we get to choose what subject we think those fit into.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. So the assigned subject categories, that's a great question. You need to go through the evaluation for photojournalism with that one photo. And then that one photo can be entered in any year into photojournalism. Same with abandoned, same with about time. So you have 3, and those categories are pre-selected basically. So if you think about the converse to that, you can't put a wild card into an assigned subject category because it does have to go through the evaluation. I don't know, they made up that rule and kind of makes sense. That's where we're trying to encourage people to stretch their boundaries a little bit, learn, try something new, et cetera, et cetera. So if you take those 3 away, the rest of those photos, you'll want to decide, is that an animal? Is it flora? Is it a landscape? And then we have this lovely catch-all category called pictorial, and it gets a lot of pictures. So you'll have quite a bit of competition in pictorial, but keep in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, we've set a minimum threshold. So even if we get 50 pictures in pictorial and everybody meets that threshold, we'll have a first, second, a third, and then we'll have 47 honorable mentions, because those are good merited pictures, and we want to make sure that anybody who puts a merited picture in gets a recognition for it. So that's kind of lead me into to the next phase of this, to talk about how the photos are judged. All right, so let me come back to my procedures. And I think Heidi, did you have any questions before we move on? Or Carol, did you have another question?
I did.
Okay. Yeah, that's all right.
So if you have several, like I didn't, but suppose I took all birds. Could I put all of my subjects, all of my not other than my regular pictures in one group?
And you take absolutely fabulous pictures of birds.
And
yes,
it doesn't matter how many you put in each
doesn't
group.
matter.
Okay.
No.
Thank
you can put all your birds into the bird category, and
okay.
So you may wind up with first, second, and third, and then a few honorable mentions, or some other people might sneak in there a little bit.
Okay, I got it.
But yeah, that's great. And again, the birds, they can be prints, they can be digitals, they can be black and white, they can be color. So yeah,
Okay.
There's no restriction on how many go into a single category.
Thank
All right. All right.
So I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And so about the group designations, that's what I'm trying to figure out, since I have never participated before. But then I get a little confused when you say you can pre-select your designation. So, I mean, I'm obviously not going to pick expert, but I'm trying to figure out, because I'm not quite a novice, but I don't know whether I'm intermediate or advanced. And I'm trying to figure out how I would determine that.
My advice would be start out in the intermediate group and see how you do.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing that fell out of all of our analysis from last year, and thanks to our webmaster, Terry Troxel, he crunched the numbers up one side and down the other. We went back several years and we decided, how are we going to set those minimums? And we looked at a lot of data to come up with the numbers. Excuse me. And what actually fell out, we thought, the expert will have a little higher level. Advanced maybe below that.
Yes, I wanted to know about the group designations, because I know you said you can kind of pre-select, but I'm not quite sure where I would fit in. This is my first time, so I mean, I'm not an expert, but I'm not sure whether I would be intermediate or advanced. So I'm just kind of need a little bit of guidance on that.
Okay. Yeah, great question. There's the cough back again. I apologize. Wherever you feel comfortable. With our newest members who have not participated, feel free to go into that novice intermediate and see how you fare for the first year.
Okay.
And then, and then feel free, next year you can move up.
Okay.
If you really want to challenge it, go into that advanced group. What I started to say earlier with our wonderful webmaster, Terry Troxel, he crunched all the numbers back several years to come up with what we were calling a minimum total score. And the concept was that our experts have been doing this for a long time. They're really good at it, that they should have to achieve a higher score than the advanced group. And then the advanced group, of course, would have to achieve a higher score than the novices.
Right.
And what we actually found is that there really was only like a 1 point difference in the scores that we set. But as you get higher, it gets harder, So I think with the novices, last year, the experts, out of 27 points, so we have 3 judges, and this is coming up, I think, I'm going to scroll down a little bit on our procedure. We invite 3 judges. The judges are asked to give points from 3 to 9 points for each image. So if you do that math, You can have as much as 27 points per image or as low as 9 points per image if they give, straight threes across the board. So we looked at that array of scores and said, well, what would make sense for the experts? And what it actually wound up to be was like 27. So 24 out of 27 for the experts. Then we looked at the advanced folks, and I believe that number was 23. And then for the novices, it was 21. So there really wasn't a whole lot of difference in there, but it gave a little bit of an edge to the novices to, get their skill levels up. And as I think Carol was saying earlier, we had some novice pictures in there that were just unbelievable. In fact, one of our novices took one of the major category, first place in one of the major categories, and it was just a stunning picture. So I would suggest that you start out in that novice intermediate, see how you do, and then next year you move up. It gives you a place to go.
Okay, I think that's good advice.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. And I think a lot of people have struggled with that. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do, if you get up higher and you think, oh, I shouldn't have made that move, then just talk to somebody on the board and, we'll take it under advisement and maybe let you move back down again. All right. I'm going to move on to the general rules. Of course, you need to actually be a member of the club in order to participate. We talked about those 12 images and that the standard ones had come through our evaluations. We defined what those wild cards are. You get up to 5 of the wild cards. One thing we want to stress, and I think this happens 99.9% of the time, we wanted to make sure that everything that is done for the photo is done by the maker, by the photographer. So all the post-processing, et cetera, you can't give it to your 12-year-old and say, hey, can you go crop that picture for me? We want it to be your work. And what we would like to see is that it's not something that was taken in a group situation where somebody comes in and sets up the studio, sets up the lights, poses the model, and then says, here, click the camera. Because we want it to be your work. Same thing with a outing, a seminar, a safari, where they're really setting up and staging the thing for you. Now you're out there sitting in the bush and there are several other people on the trip with you, and the cheetah jumps down out of the tree and you take the picture. Yeah, that's awesome, and that's definitely allowed. But it's just trying to stay away from having something that's not truly your own work and your own creative vision. An image may only be entered once. Again, we rarely ever see this, but we don't want you to enter it as a color and as a black and white. Or if it's a flower with a bee on it, don't put it in animals and put it in flora. So, just that image, just please enter it into one and not as a print and a digital, same idea. Please don't watermark them. Don't put your name on the face of the image, because when the judges judge, now granted, they're usually from out of state, so they don't know us anyway, but we don't want that possibility to sway their image if they see a name on the image. We'll talk about file names. I mentioned there's a whole deal at the end. If you've attended any of our, especially if you attended the last evaluation with Anthony Rumley, he is big on finishing. And I think in the thing last night, he kept saying, you need to finish that. You need to finish that. And I thought, some of our new members may not know what he's talking about. So I tucked into the chat when Anthony says finishing. Now keep in mind, he's a big guy at the VPPA, the Virginia Professional Photographers Association. When they enter digital images into their competitions, the judges are definitely looking for some kind of matting around the edge and what he calls a stroke. So it's a thin line that goes around the edge of the photo. And Anthony felt so strongly about that about 3 years ago. He said, would you like me to teach your club how to do that? And we all said, yes, please. So he was wonderful. He conducted a little Zoom meeting and we recorded it, and it's out on our YouTube. Anthony talking about how to change the canvas size of your photo so that you create that black border around it. And I think we all learned last night or Wednesday night, don't put white mats on your pictures, because Most of the judges don't like that. They like to see a darker mat, either dark gray or black, or, maybe you can get really creative and pick up a color that's in the picture, but you just don't want the mat to override the picture. And then there's a way that you can put just a little tiny edge around it. It's almost like if you've seen double matting done in real life, it's kind of the idea. So he had a great video on that, and I encourage you to go to the CCR YouTube channel and watch that, because that's a great thing to do. Enter things through the evaluations, and then when you get ready to prepare it for end of year, you might want to think about putting that mat around it so it gives a more finished look to the judges. All right, we did talk a little about those post-processing guidelines in those general categories. So I won't go over that in too much detail here, but again, we want to keep those general categories that are mentioned there. We want to keep those more realistic, and then those special categories, decide subject, creative art, just have at it. Get really creative. Okay, the categories that we're going to use for end of year, and again, those have not changed at all from last year, are animals, architecture, creative art, and that's that wild, crazy one you can do whatever you want, flora, landscape, portrait, and pictorial. Pictorial is pretty much our catch-all. Those would be, pictures of your grandkids at the birthday party, or pets would go into, like you do a portrait of a pet, that would go probably into the pictorial category. And then those final assigned subject categories that we had this year, the first one that we had with Fred Morton was photojournalism. And then we did Abandoned, I believe, with Jesse from Artworks. And then Anthony Rumley looked at our About Time photos just the other day. So those are the categories. Let me pause here and see if anybody has questions about categories. All right. Pretty well laid out. And as I have offered to people over the past few years, I'm not the greatest, but I could give you some insight if you wanted to just send me a picture and say, hey, Karen, should this flower picture with the bee on it go into animals or go into flora? And I'll give you my opinion, and feel free to ask any of the other board members where you think that might go. So place them where they fit the best, where you think they fit, and we'll see what the judges say. As I mentioned earlier, we also have a breakdown between color and black and white. So the color images are all judged together. The black and white images are judged together, and the awards are awarded based on that. So you don't cross over. You don't have a color image competing with the black and white, except for our best in show. I take that back. In the assigned subject categories, we don't designate between color and black and white. Those are all kind of judged as a group. But you want to make sure, if you are converting to black and white, that they are completely monochrome. You don't want any tones of another color seeping in. So you could do if you wanted to do like an old timey type of sepia picture, that would go into, we had talked about maybe even renaming this, instead of black and white, to renaming it to monochrome. But that's basically what we're looking at there. Some of our folks have gone to shooting infrared, and most of those infrared photos can be shown and judged in the black and white category, if you will. And then media type, again, that's digital or print, as we had talked about earlier. What I will point out, and I think it's listed again later in this procedure, if you do submit prints, we still need to get that digital image, because again, we're going to be doing a slideshow at the banquet, or if we don't have a banquet, we'll still have a slideshow of all the images. We'll be sharing them on Facebook. We'll be sharing them in the newsletter. So we do need to have those digital images as well. And those are the ones that have to come in by the deadline. And then Leo, our print director, will provide instructions later on, if you decide to do a print, where and when to deliver those prints. So just keep in mind, you got to send a digital image in for everything. That's how you get your image in the competition. And then if you decide you want it to be a print, you can physically deliver that later on. All right. Talked about groups before. This is a little bit more of an in-depth definition of what the groups are intended to be. And as we said, new members or those who haven't competed before, probably a good place to start would be the novice intermediate group. And then work your way up as you advance in your skill levels. So I just touched briefly on the concept we came up for group advancement. And we decided that the best way to determine if someone is ready to move up is, well, how many awards have they won? Have the judges evaluated their skills by giving them a first or a second or a third place award? So we decided to start counting those as credits. How many you won in the last competition. Obviously, somebody brand new coming in has no credits. But whatever you've won the last competition, and we're going to do it on a running 3-year basis. So we'll keep track of those. You probably want to keep track of them yourself so you know where you stand. But at any point in time, if you feel like, well, I think I'm ready to move up, it's fine. You'll move up just simply by the way you name your files. You'll tell us, instead of being in the novice intermediate group, that you've decided to move to advanced, because you'll put an A in your file name, and that's how we'll know that you've moved up. So that's probably more of a discussion for later on, probably not as relevant right now. So let's talk a little more detail about the judges and the scoring. I mentioned earlier we have 3 judges, and they assign points. This has been done since the dawn of time, I think, way before when I joined the club. They've always had 3 judges. They've always used a system that starts baseline of 3 points to 9 points. So the maximum that any image could earn would be 27. And in the past year, as I said, we did this all digitally online, and the judges were sitting there watching images come up on their computers. And we had our scribes, as we call them, standing by, and the judge would text their number to the scribe, and our camera club team member would put the number into a spreadsheet. So the spreadsheets were sort of building this whole data system for us as we went through. And those judges are fast. So just kind of like Anthony last night, Wednesday night, when the images pop up, they're seeing them for the first time. They make a quick determination. Okay, I'm in the animal category. This is black and white. Is it in focus? Is it sharp? Does it have a wow factor, etc.? All this is running through their head, and within just a minute or so, they're giving it a number and putting that number in. So that's how the scoring works. And I talked a little bit earlier about that minimum total score, because what we had been seeing in the past was we had some crazy limitations on awards. So if there were only 5 images entered in a particular, we started thinking of it in terms of a judging block. So within animals, color, prints, for the novices, that group was all judged together. If there were only 5, we would only give 1 award. So there might have been 4 more really great images, but because of some arbitrary number of images submitted, which you have no control over, we would only give a first place. And there were several of us that said, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. We need to be able to reward images that have met a criteria, that are merited images. And so that was kind of the rationale behind assigning these minimum total scores, because there are a lot of judging blocks. Because if you think about it, we had animals, color, digital for novice. Then we have animals, black and white, digital for novices. So there's quite a bit of group. And what the judges will do, and the way we present the pictures to them, is by category. So we literally start at the beginning of the alphabet, and they see all the animal images. They don't know what group anyone is in. They're simply seeing those images and giving that image a merited score based on what they think of that image. And then our spreadsheet allows us to segment out and say, okay, well, here's the novice group, and here's the advanced group, and here's the expert group. And then we're able to place those awards. The judges will break any ties. If there happen to be ties, 2 images get 24s, then they go through another round of judging. We actually bring the image back up. The judges look at it again, and they use a little bit different numbering system on the second go around to try. And that's why we have 3, because, hopefully somebody will break a tie, when you have the 3 judges. And then they'll go through and make sure so that before the judges leave that category, we know that we have a first, second, or third and we know the order that all of those images fall in within that breakdown. All right, that's a lot of information, a lot of number stuff to throw at you. Questions?
Do we ever know what score our pictures got?
Oh, that's a really great question. Before last year, the board never even thought about sharing it. And last year, a couple of people asked about that, and we said, well, gee, why not? There were some holdouts that said, oh, people shouldn't have their numbers, blah, 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 blah. And there were a few of us that said, no, that would be really beneficial, I think, to know. Am I scoring consistently in the 17, 18 range? And I need to step my game up a little bit? Or am I just missing? Am I, 21, 22, 23? So what we did was we sent a message out to everybody, and you can still get them from last year if you want to. I mean, they're stored out in our Google Drive, but Terry was able to go in and segment the spreadsheet and be able to say, okay, Karen, here are your scores. These are your 12 pictures, and these are the scores that the judges gave, on those pictures. And I found it really helpful to know. The first few years, it was kind of a big mystery to me as to how it all happened. I just knew I didn't get many awards. And then when I saw the numbers, I went, oh, okay. So I'm, 18s, 19s. Yeah, now I need to know. Now I know what I need to focus on. So I thought it was really helpful to get the numbers. We don't publish, club wide because we don't want to embarrass anyone. But yeah, just request Terry, send it to Terry, our webmaster. It's webmaster.CCRVA@gmail.com. And he'll be glad to send you your scores from last year. So great question. And I think it's helpful. I'm a numbers person. I'm a geeky spreadsheet gal. So I kind of like to see the numbers. The whole thing was just really fascinating to me to see how it all worked.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Heidi, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. There's a lot of moving parts to it. All right. And then again, there's the credits. First place is 3, 2, and 1. And then no credits for honorable mention. And we'll talk about those major awards a little bit later. All right. Getting into the nitty gritty here. So when you submit those digital files, keep in mind, I said we have hundreds of them that are coming in. We want them to our digital director, and that's digital.CCRVA@gmail.com by midnight, October 15th. So that's a Saturday night. The really two basic specifications. They need to be JPEG format. You can't accept any TIFFs or any PNGs or whatever. So they do need to be JPEG.jpg. And the longest side of your image must not exceed 1,920 pixels. And that's just so it can be displayed on screen for the judges to be able to judge it. And, for most of the time when you send them in for evaluation, it was the same requirement. All right. If you have questions or issues about that, I'm not going to go into those two extra procedures there. But if you come in here and click on that Adobe Lightroom procedure or the Photoshop procedure, those seem to be the two main software programs that people are using. So we went through sort of a step-by-step process on how to do that in those two programs. If you're using something else, you can maybe see if there's somebody on the board that knows. Those are the two I know, and I wrote the procedure, so those are the two that we did. And I think we covered probably about 90% of our folks on how to size those images. But again, if you get in the middle of it and you need some help, just let us know. Now, the file naming, it looks like Greek if you look at it as kind of as a whole. But if you break it down, what we want in your file name is to have the media type first. And remember back earlier, we had abbreviations for all those things. So media type is real simple. It's either a P for a print or a D for digital. So that is your first item. Then we're using underscores to separate the different aspects of the file name. The next thing that comes is the category. So is it an animal? Is it flora? Is it an assigned subject or time? I'm looking at the actual example down a little bit lower, the D_AS_T. So that was assigned subject time. Then we want your color designation. Was it color or was it black and white? That's the BW in the real example there. Then what group are you in? This is where you tell us, okay, I've made that decision now. Am I advanced? Am I the novice, intermediate, or expert? So that's the N, the A in this case, or the E. Then we want your image title. And I loved Anthony the other night. He's like, don't get too carried away with those image titles. He likes short and sweet. And then after that, whether it is a standard image, in other words, did it come through an evaluation? And of course, if it's an assigned subject, it has to be standard. It had to have come through the evaluation. And then your name, and then the .jpg. So it seems really, really complicated, but if you take it, like they say, the sand pile, one shovel at a time, it's really pretty straightforward. And the reason for this is that the digital director has a program that actually segments things out based on the file name, so it puts them in the right buckets. So it does a little bit of the work for him. He's not having to sit there manually and sort through all these things. All right, that's a lot. So let me throw that out there for questions if you have a question. Okay. Yeah.
The only thing I'm missing on there is the wild card is WC, right? Am I missing that somewhere?
Okay. So in other words, ST would be standard and the WC is wildcard. And I think if we go back up, somewhere back up here in the procedure. And I think the other example that's back in the table of content or back in the frequently asked questions, I think did put a wildcard. Okay. So yeah, so down there on the bottom, let me point with my pointer. See where it says ST there? That would be WC for wildcard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All righty. And also notice my title, time sensitive, I have a hyphen in my title. So you can use some of the special characters. Don't get too crazy because I think you can use an exclamation point. You can use a dash, but don't do pound sign, percentage sign, all that crazy stuff because it throws the program into a tailspin. But dashes are fine, because there are a lot of hyphenated words in the English language and some people have hyphenated names. So we will handle that just fine. And that was why we switched to the underscores to be able to segregate those titles. All righty, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit here. Okay. And then as I mentioned earlier, you deliver those as that deadline. There's the email address for our digital director. All right, now for prints. Gosh, I haven't talked about prints in 3 years. This is amazing. We evaluate our prints on a light box. It's a big contraption that someone built and it shines a light down on the picture. And we've got some guidelines that we use from PSA to do that. But we do have to have at least a 5x7 for the judges to be able to really evaluate it. And we can't go any larger than 16x30. So anywhere in that ballpark is fine if you decide to put a print in. They must be mounted, so you can't just send us a loose photo on photo paper. It has to be mounted on something. It can be matted, actually have a mat on it, or it can be printed on any material that allows it to freestand. So you could do a canvas print, you could do a metal print, you could do glass, but glass makes us really nervous because we don't want to break your glass. But I would say, stick with canvas or stick with a good solid foam core backing, to put, please don't tape it onto cardboard and send it in. So we're very careful with it. And I love, Leo is great. He wears his white gloves when he handles the prints. He's very, very careful with prints. So we just don't want anything to happen to them. And like I said, no tape, don't tape the corners down, please. Cannot have framed prints. Again, that glass, we really don't want to deal with glass and frames and all of that kind of stuff. And then there is a form, a little print form, and you see that's in blue there. So if you click on that, it'll take you over to the print form on our website. And you just write on the form your title, what your category is, et cetera, and that allows the print director to flip it over. You tape it to the back, and he says, okay, well, this is an animal, it's black and white, et cetera, et cetera. And then he groups all of those prints so that the judges can then go through them. So again, I won't click on that. It's just a basic piece of paper that prompts you, as to what boxes you need to check. All right. And then Leo will be in touch. Hopefully we'll have some information in the newsletter. We'll probably send an email out a couple times to remind you if you're going to do prints, where to deliver them. He accepted them at his home the last time we did prints. And keep in mind, as I said earlier, that you do need to send a digital file in for those prints, and that has to be in on that regular date, that October, I forgot the date now, October 15th, I think I said earlier. So that does have to be in, and then you follow it up later by actually physically delivering the print. All right, any questions about prints? Are you guys thinking about maybe doing prints this year? I know, I was a real chicken. I went years before I ever even turned a print in. I'm like, why do I want to go to all that trouble to print something? And then I got a couple that I thought, I kind of like that on my wall. So I entered those, or maybe I'll enter that in artworks. So I did go for a couple of prints, but it's a lot of trouble. I like the digital competition. Okay, the end of year awards, as I said, those will be given out, grouped for, between the different categories, for different groups of people, black and white versus color, et cetera, et cetera. We'll assemble all of those awards, and they will be given out, they will be announced at our December meeting on December the 7th. And as we did say, those the judging blocks, I had to come up with a term to talk about how they compete with each other. So it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different blocks of how we do that. The groups are judged together. We don't judge novices with the advanced, or the advanced with the experts, or whatever. Everybody's judged within their own group and within all the different categories. And for those who meet that minimum total score, we'll assign the very top image will get a first place, the second will get second place, third, and then any other images that meet the minimum total score will get an honorable mention within that particular judging block. Now, the downside of that, if no entries in that grouping, that judging block, meet that minimum, there won't be an award. So just because you limp across the finish line 10 hours after the race begins, you won't get an award if there was a set time that you had to beat in order to get an award. And that's kind of the same concept. We don't want this to be Little League where everybody gets a trophy, but we strive for between 20 and 25% of the entries will receive some kind of recognition. And we feel like that makes it sort of a fair competition, but not everybody gets their Little League trophy. So that was the big point of contention for last year, because it was a major change in the way that we were giving out awards. All right, any questions on that? Okay, I see heads nodding. That's good. Then comes like the grand prize winners. So for within each category, we will have, first place winners, first place animal in black and white, first place animal color, et cetera, et cetera. Then we take all of the color digital images that won first place, and the judges will rejudge those to come up with the best color digital award. And these are members of our club that I believe Carol Hageman actually knew some of these folks. They were some of the founders of the club. And remember, our club is 90 years old. So they go way, way back, but we have kind of memorialized them with awards named after them. And these are the 6 major awards that we give. There's a best color digital. Again, all the first place black and white digitals will compete for best black and white digital. And then this year we're re-adding in the best color print, best black and white print. Then there is always an award for the best assigned subject. So the first place winner in each of those 3 assigned subjects will compete for the Hyman Rose Award. And then all of those entries that won those awards will compete for best in show. And we've just had some awesome pictures for best in show. I did do an article in the newsletter. Go back as far as I can find and show all the best in show pictures, because it's quite a mixture. One year it was an animal, it was a bird picture, And I think I mentioned Jeff Claypool earlier. His was a black and white, really stark picture of a prison that was, just a really emotional picture. Harold Lana won Best in Show last year with a creative art piece. If you remember, he had a horse grazing, and then he had a statue of a horse that he'd taken somewhere totally different. And he put those two together, and it was really cool. The judges were quite intrigued with that image. Those are the three that come to mind immediately. I think I saw way back in the archive, someone won with a peacock. That was a Best in Show. So you never know. You never know what it's going to be. It's always interesting to see that unveiled. All righty. Now, we're into the references section of the procedure now, and this is what we give the judges. And if you remember back when we handed out the evaluation procedures for our members at the beginning of the year, this was part of those evaluation procedures. So what we want you to do is we're going to ask the judges to look at these 5 things. So these are the 5 things you should focus on with your image. Number 1, what's the impact? Does it tell a story? This is what we refer to sometimes as that wow factor. And of course, technical. As Anthony mentioned the other night, if it's out of focus, you're probably not going to do really well. So we're going to look at those technical factors with color balance. Do the colors look true? If it's black and white, what is the tonal scale on that photo? Have you shown us some creativity? Even in, the non-creative art categories, we want to see how did you use your lighting or your color or special effects, or did you take a really different perspective on shooting the clock tower in downtown Richmond? Looking for that creativity. Show us a different way to look at something. And then, of course, composition. We know all the composition rules, but did we break the composition rules for an artistic purpose? Is the subject right smack in the middle of it because that's where we think it ought to be? Or have we done the rule of thirds, etc.? So the judges are going to look at how you compose the picture. And then again, that finishing piece that we talked about, and that Anthony, that's one of his things. Have you added a digital mat or borders or strokes? Or if it is an actual print, is there a mat on it? You didn't tape the corners down onto the cardboard, etc. So we're going to look at the finishing of that. So those are the 5 main things. I think Anthony mentioned the other night, VPPA has a 12-point scale. We decided that we wanted a little simpler than that. So we have our little 5-point scale of what the judges are actually looking for, what we ask them to look for when they judge those pictures. So any questions on that before I scroll forward?
Yes. The finishing. In the evaluations throughout the year, it seems like some of the people who evaluated liked having the finishing and some didn't. And so, but then they're showing up as finishing on there. So are the people who are judging, you don't know whether they're going to like it or not, use the use of it or not.
Right.
So
and
do you
we
feel
actually
like
had that exact discussion with the judges last year, because 2 years ago, we were noticing that exactly what you're saying, that the judges were like, well, what is all these mats on things? Well, we had somebody teach us how to do that. So that's what we're doing. So we had an actual discussion with them saying, look, we had a training session and it's been strongly suggested to us that, we finish these pictures. So you're going to see a lot of mats, and it said, we'd like you to think about it. If it's distracting from the picture, then okay. But you're going to see, and we prepared them for that. They were going to see a lot of pictures that had those finishing. And there were some that, when they popped up on the screen, I kind of went, oh, I think they overdid that a little bit. And, and the judges may have thought the same thing. They may have liked it, but we did make sure to point that out to them that a lot of our members were doing those strokes.
So I don't need to feel uncomfortable that I didn't do it, because I'm not going to. I don't have time.
Yeah. No. They gosh, I guess it's not
maybe
even
next year.
50. It's probably 60-40. I'd say 40% of the pictures that we saw last year had those mats, because they worshipped at the knee of Anthony. And then the rest of them, no, they didn't think they needed it. And I even had some of the evaluators say that picture just stands alone, because a lot of times full bleed, and that's what they call it in the printing world, when the picture goes all the way to the edge, full bleed is exactly what that picture needs. So, it's totally up to you on what you do. Just, I wouldn't put a really wide stroke on something or something really bright.
Maybe next year. Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right, moving on. This is just a little piece on how to select a category. When we changed them a couple of years ago, we came up with some ideas here on, how do I know if it's a tiger on an African safari? Yeah, that's pretty much animals. So most of them are fairly cut and dry. But again, if you have questions on that, just talk to your board members. Just keep in mind, if you get too crazy with stuff, we really want to see that in creative art. And then our glossary, again, I'm not going to go through each of those. I think we talked about individually. This is where the WC for wildcard, as Carol was asking earlier, it's like, I see ST is standard, but the abbreviation for wildcard, of course, is WC. It's down here somewhere. They're sort of in alphabetical order. I think they are. Yeah, there we go. Wildcard is the very last one in the glossary. And then last but not least, we had some advice here. Actually, this is not last, but on resizing. I mentioned that earlier. If you just click on it, it'll take you to this part: Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Lightroom, and then last but not least, the frequently asked questions and the answers. So we go into a little bit more detail. I think you were asking about another example of the naming, and I believe I put that in here. Talk about the credits again, the minimum score, naming convention. I thought there was another naming convention example. Maybe not. I'm sorry. Yeah, we didn't do another one. But just another way of kind of looking at things, because some people like a Q&A format. All righty. We almost got it in an hour. Actually, I think we did, because we started a little bit late. And then we had the hiccup where I had to go get a glass of water. All right. Does that help any? Is it a little clearer? Do you feel more comfortable?
Yes, definitely.
I see heads nodding. It's
very
really
much.
not that scary.
Yes, it was helpful.
Yeah, it was a little scary for me the first time going through it, because there's just so much. Right. And what I found is, if you find a buddy within the camera club, and I'd be happy to be your buddy. Once I named all of my pictures, I printed them all, or I pasted them into a little spreadsheet, and I sent them to somebody else and said, can you just please add another set of eyes to make sure that I got them in the right order, I've used the right abbreviations, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll be glad to look over your namings for you. And then Nelson is real good about catching things if something doesn't make sense. He might send it back and say, wait a minute. And the good news is, if you get him in early, he has more time to be able to think about them, evaluate them, get back to you, and help you, if there are some problems. So I think probably if you give him another week or so, he should be ready to start accepting end of year stuff. I know I need to send mine in early because I'm traveling during the deadline. Yeah. So, and one other little helpful hint that it took me a couple of years to figure out, and surprisingly, I was ready to go, what? How stupid, Karen, because I live and die by spreadsheets. Why I didn't keep a spreadsheet those first couple of years as I was entering things in the evaluations, but I found out that, oh gosh, that is so helpful, that I will categorize them as I'm putting them into the evaluation in my brain. I go, okay, that's an animal picture. All right, I got animal. And it's not so important now. I didn't want to be competing against myself earlier, but now I could put all 12 of my bird photos in if I wanted to, if I took them like Carol did. My bird photos are really bad. But my portraits, I generally do pretty good portraits. I'm going to enter several portraits this year. And I have a color one, I have a black and white one, and I might have another color one. So I might compete against myself in color portraits. But hey, if I just get an honorable mention, I'm patting myself on the back going, okay, I did good. I got an honorable mention and I'm happy. So that spreadsheet idea had really helped me. Okay. And then it's a nice record for yourself of well, I don't remember 5 years ago. What did I enter 5 years ago? Oh yeah, I entered those pictures. And then, when the awards come in, I kept track of, well, which ones actually won awards, and and then point scores. If you want to get your point scores from Terry, you can go back and put those points in on each of your images, and it may help you self-teach yourself on, well, how do I get better? Oh, they liked this picture better than they liked that picture. What's different? And then, you can sort of self-analyze some of the things that you're doing and help yourself improve.
One quick question is, I'm not going to do this, but it came up in a conversation. Can you enter a picture that you've entered on previous years?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yes, you may.
Okay.
As long as it did not win an award, you can put it in, and this set of 3 judges, and I'm pretty sure Carol doesn't recycle judges. She tries to get different judges every year. So in fact, I have thought about it because I have a peacock picture that I think is just outstanding. In fact, that's why I knew that a peacock had won a few years ago, because I looked at that picture and went, my peacock is just as good as that peacock. It got no love whatsoever. I'm like, seriously? But I was competing with Bob Scammerhorn at the time. I was new into the A group, and my peacock was like, so I may just go resurrect him and re-enter him at some point in time.
That's funny. Okay.
Yeah, feel free to put them in again as long as they didn't win in the past. That's a great precedent. All right. Okay. Heidi, any parting questions or thoughts or?
No, but I will reach out if I come across anything as I'm working on them.
Okay. Super.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Karen.